When we add or subtract matrices, so if we're dealing with 2 or 3 matrices, the most important thing that has to be true is that each matrix must have the same number of rows and columns. Because what we're going to do is when we add or subtract matrices, we're going to add or subtract their corresponding entries. Here's what that means. If we look at this example, we have a 2 by 3 matrix, and we have a 2 by 3 matrix. If, just as an example, that that column wasn't there, what we're going to do when we add these is we add the corresponding entries. So we're going to add 3 to -3. We're going to add 1 to 1. We're going to add 0 to, there's nothing there. That's why they have to have the same number of rows and same number of columns. It's okay if they don't, but you're just not allowed to add or subtract them if they don't. So now if we see here that both of these matrices have the same number of rows and columns, just like I showed you a second ago, we add their corresponding entries. Again, this is the first row, first column, first row, first column. When you add 3 to a -3, you get 0, and you do have to write a 0. Now, if we add 2 to 2, because again we're adding because of the plus sign here, 2 plus 2 is 4. In the middle column, top row, middle column, top row, we have 1 plus 1, which is 2. Middle column, bottom row, -1 plus 0 is -1. Again, I'm just adding each individual piece. On our far right column, top row, we have a 0. In the same place on this matrix, we have a 6. 0 plus 6 is 6. And our last spot then, -5 and -8. -5 plus -8 is a -13. So when we add those two matrices together, we end up with this answer. Let's look at another example. These matrices show the House and Senate in 1917. Write and label a single matrix that shows the number of men and women in Congress in 1917. So in this matrix, it shows the men and women in the House. This one shows the men and women in the Senate. And what we want to do is write a single matrix that shows all of them all together. So what we will do is we're going to add the numbers in the same position. So if I add 210 to 253, I get 263. Going down, 215. So again, I'm dealing in the men column. Now I'm at the Republicans. 215 plus 42 is 257. And then we have 9 other and 1 other, which would be 10. Now, for women, of course, this is back in 1917. Pretty quick to add. If we have 0 women plus 0 women, we have 0, of course. I think this is kind of cool. 1 woman in the for the Republicans and women, and 0 down here in the Senate. 1 plus 0 is 1. And finally, 0 plus 0 equals 0. Coming up with the matrix isn't too difficult, hopefully, but it does say to label it. So you want to go back and say that this is men, and this is women, and this is Democrats, Republicans, and other. So we could see the total now in a matrix. If I wanted to know how many women other there were, I could see that there was 0. Let's look at this example. It says you own a restaurant at 2 different locations. The matrices below show revenue and expenses for 3 months at each location. So here's the revenue. At location 1, what happened in June. At location 2, what happened in July. And then you can see August here. And these are the expenses, again at each location for June, July, and August. The first thing I want to do is write a matrix that shows the monthly profits for each location. So if we're talking about the monthly profits, that's our revenue. If we want to see the profits, we want to see revenue with expenses. So what we're going to do just like we've been doing, is we're going to add our corresponding entries. So, at location 1, if I add 31,042 to expenses 30,114, what do I get? Well, we got to think a little bit harder about this one. If it's a revenue, it's positive. But what happens when it's an expense? If it's an expense, that means it's coming out. So be careful when you're not just adding the entries together, but you're actually thinking about what they mean. So in this case, we're going to add 31 to a negative 30,114. And when you do that, you get 928. The same thing is true here for July. Our revenue was 42,793. Our expenses is a negative 42,997. When you add these two together, you get a negative 204. In August, at location 1, our revenue was 33,061. At location 1 in August, our expenses were 32,003. That is a total of 1,058. Okay. So again, we want to do it now the same with location 2. Okay. This is going to be our positive, it's revenue. This is going to be our negative here. So we had 46,712 to negative 43,998. We get 27,014. Continuing down, we combine these two here in the same position. That's 2,730. And our final entry here, 42,543 and a negative 41,056. When we combine those, we get 1,487. Oops. Now, there's our matrix. Again, you should say that this is location 1, and this is location 2, and this is June, July, and August. Again, yes, we're combining them, but we have to keep in mind what our matrix represents. If we continue with this problem, and I place our matrix back here, it says which location had higher overall profits during the 3-month period. Okay, so again this question says what location had higher overall profits during the 3-month period. Well, remember this matrix here represents our profits. So if we wanted to know the total profits overall during the 3-month period, you would just add 928 plus a negative 204 plus 1,058. And so if you just added those three up, your total profit for location 1 would be $1,782. Do the same thing here for location 2. If you add all of those up, we get $6,931. So this shows us what our total profit is at each location. One more question here. Which location lost money in which month? So we just have to read our matrix here. Which location lost money? Well, if you think about who's losing money, we're looking for the one that's negative. So to answer the question, which location lost money? Well, it's going to be location 1, because that's the only one that's negative. And in which month was it? Well, here's location 1. If you go over to the month row here, we see that it was in July. So again, matrices are just a way of organizing information in a nice, concise way. And when you label it, you're able to see what each entry means.